of the Singapore comics community, the biggest fan group and fan club in Singapore, and we are so excited to have you here in Singapore. So, maybe you can introduce yourself to the camera.
Yeah, I'm Ram V. I'm a writer. I write several things, including comics. I've written Detective, Led a Star. I've had a run on Swamp Thing, Savage Shores, Blue Green, and more. So that's what I do. And you know, I probably will be making more comics in the future.
Okay, so let's start with the first question. Everyone wants to know you guys, right?
Yeah.
So, we want to know, and these questions that I'm asking are all compiled of interviews. I know you did a Reddit AMA, score questions, you know.
Yeah.
So, biggest pressing issue, not issue, question. Which previous run has been your inspiration for the upcoming ones?
I mean, I really try not to take direct inspiration from previous runs, but obviously Kirby's Fourth World, the origin run, if you will, is quite formative. I also take bits and pieces from Silent Sun's Orion run, and then there's also a collection of short stories that appeared as backup stories in the Orion run that were later collected into a thing called Tales of the New God. So there are things I'm pulling from there. And then of the more contemporary stuff, probably the Tom King, Miss Gerard, Mr. Miracle. And little bits and pieces like with little pieces from Seven Soldiers, from Grant Morrison. So largely my influences though are outside of comics. So I take a lot from things like Dune, things like Game of Thrones, more contemporary sci-fi stuff. So yeah.
Okay, so speaking of your influences, I remember reading that you were really interested in mythology. So
Yeah.
I remember that Jack Kirby's New Gods was particularly inspired by Greco-Roman mythology, and you said that yours is inspired by Hindu mythology. Is that right?
Well, it's not really inspired by, but it takes pieces from Hindu mythology. I'm more fascinated by the idea that current day comic books are contemporary mythology. And I think treating them and looking at them that way is super interesting to me. The thing I'm taking from Hindu mythology though is, I think fundamentally, and some of this is true of Greco-Roman mythology as well, but largely I find that the Indian gods are a little bit more fallible, a little bit more nuanced. They make lots of mistakes. In fact, they probably make more mistakes than doing right things. And I think that leads to good drama and good stories and good characters. So I'm trying to bring some of that into New Gods. And then I think structurally, the framework for this New God story is taken from the Hindu sort of end of the world mythology, the Kali Yuga and the coming of Kalki kind of myth. So I'm taking a bit from there and saying, what would that look like if it was in the DC universe?
So actually my next question was about, is it difficult blending completely, not completely, but a new mythology with already existing mythology? I guess you kind of answered that.
Yeah, not really. I think that kind of stuff is great. I think comics is great for that kind of stuff really, because the expectation is that you're doing strange and weird and wild things in comics. And so no one bats an eyelid when you're like, yeah, there's an Indian god among new gods in New Genesis or Apocalypse. And I think that's the kind of stuff that I find a lot of joy in comics. So I think you should expect to see something like that.
So I'm really glad you mentioned New Genesis and Apocalypse, because as we all know, all in started with Darkseid dying. So apart from what happens on the happenings in New Genesis, will we be going back to see what's happening in Apocalypse, and is there going to be like a power vacuum because of the death of Darkseid?
Yeah, and Darkseid being the type of entity that he is, I think the power vacuum expands beyond just Apocalypse as well. Of course, we do go back to Apocalypse, and even historically, Apocalypse has not been entirely loyal to Darkseid at all times. So I think we'll see some of that coming to the fore, but also Darkseid's presence was maybe a deterrent to other kinds of bad things that were staying away, and now that he's gone, they don't feel so threatened anymore. And so we'll see a a fallout happened from that as well.
This is so cool. And so, I actually have a personal question of mine.
Yeah.
Ram V is a very famous and awesome writer, as we all know, and you've had many different books, Detective Comics, Catwoman. That's just from the DC side. I wanted to ask you, of all of your favorite, what is your favorite project of all the projects you've done? So
I mean, it's really a difficult question to answer because I take a lot of joy in just working on stories. So whether it's a really famous story or a big character or a long story or short story, like I really enjoy all of them. And then once they're finished, I don't care about any of them. So it's very hard for me to say this one is my favorite or this one isn't. I can say I have great memories of having a lot of fun while working on things like Justice League Dark or the recent visual book. And then I think working on something like Blue Green was really rewarding because it was such an intense book that I put a lot of myself into. And then a book like Let a Star is really rewarding just because you get to meet conventions like this and you get to meet people whose lives were really touched by that book. So yeah, I enjoy different things about different books, but I don't really have a favorite.
now, do you plan on doing any more original work? So for example, the One Hand, Six Fingers, Rare Flower, Rare Flavors, these were all standouts, and I know a lot of people that I've talked to online all love these kind of books.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I got into doing this Marvel stuff off of doing my own original work. I had done Paradiso, These Second Chores, La Bomba before I did any. And I don't think I would ever stop that. Like, it's like breathing air to me to tell original stories. And so I think you should expect to see a continued output of creative things from me. I've got Blue Red Windows with Distillery. I'm working on that with Joel Jones. That should be out next year. I've got another creator-owned that was recently greenlit with Mike Perkins, who did Swamp Thing with me. And then more creator-owned plans to come down the line. So yeah,
You heard it there. Now, we have 3 questions that I sourced directly from fans because I asked a few people, and these are questions that are specifically that they want you to answer. Okay. First one has to do with DC, alright? So specifically to do with how does the whole multiversal nature of the new gods or dark side work? Because some people or some works say like, oh, there's only one dark side in the whole multiverse. How is that possible if there are books like Deceased where dark side is anti-living, but then there are some books like here where the dark side died. So is there one dark side? Is there one new god? How does that work?
So this is the part where I said I love thinking of comics as contemporary mythology.
Right.
And if you look at actual mythological stories, they are full of contradictions.
Right.
In one story someone died, and then the next story actually they didn't die, they were alive. And in one story there are 2 gods and they are opposed to each other. In another story, actually they're both avatars of the same god. And so I like thinking of comics that way. And so I think it's more fun to accept everything is true. There is only one dark side. There are many dark sides. The dark side in Deceased is alive, the dark side in the mainstream DCU is dead. And you have to accept these things as simultaneous truths with comics. And I think part of the reason I find Grant Morrison's book really exciting is I think he's the only creator I can think of that tried to encapsulate that idea of like everything is true in the DC universe. That's my approach.
I really love that you say that because Batman by Grant Morrison was one of my first comics, and the fact that he took everything from the old Batman comics and made it all canon is really awesome to me. And so there you go. Everything is possible. So you talked a lot about mythology, right?
Yeah.
And so, this whole interview has just been you talking about mythology and your love of mythology, and it's evident in all your different books, right? Where did this love of mythology and different mythologies come from?
I always grew up around mythological stories as a kid. My grandmother was this kind of quasi-medicine for her small community and neighborhood, and we would go and visit her when we were children. And so also had a grandma who was a frontman, magician, and a mechanical engineer all at once. And so I think when you grow up around characters like that, you take a shine for a story and you develop an ear for them. So yeah.
Okay. And now a really interesting question for me, right? So I read that you were a chemical engineer before you became a comics writer, right?
Yeah.
Now, interesting. I'm actually going to go to college to be a chemical engineer. So my unorthodox question is, did becoming a chemical engineer and then switching to comics, did that shape your way of writing or thinking in any way?
Yeah, I think so. I look at stories. I try to accept this contradiction. You know, I think creativity. You cannot engineer it, right? There is some aspect of it that is nebulous, that you cannot define or articulate, but you understand on some instinctive level. But then on the other side, I'm also accepting the fact that you can break down and analyze stories like pieces of a puzzle and work with it. And I think having these approaches, I think that sort of analytical approach certainly comes from my engineering background. And I think it's super fun useful for me, and also it's a big part of the kind of stories that I tell. So my stories are always hopefully structurally sound. They're always structurally doing interesting things. And I think that exists because I tend to think of them as pieces of the puzzle as well.
Okay. Last question. So I don't know if you can tell, but I'm on the younger side, right? 18, 19. So we are at the Singapore Comics community. We are actually trying this initiative right now, where we are trying to get more younger people into comics, for the new generation. So what would you say to the new generation? Either whether they be writers, artists, or just anyone trying to get into comics, what would you tell them?
I would just say that stories are a fundamental formative experience of who we are as human beings, and stories exist in multiple mediums. I think comics is a wonderful medium because it is very inviting on a fundamental level. You don't need a screen. You don't need to invest half an hour of your time to watch an episode, or you don't need to invest 2 weeks of your time to read a novel. There is almost no barrier to entry to just picking up a comic book and reading a story. And I think that's very inviting. And my love of stories was shaped by the comics that I read as a kid. And I think comics acts as a gateway into reading all kinds of stuff and experiencing all kinds of mediums. And so, yeah, I would think of it that way. But also, just have fun. Read whatever you like, read whatever you want. Sometimes comics will confuse you, sometimes they will irritate you, sometimes they will bring you joy, and that's all part of the experience.
And that's exactly the core message that we have here. Just have fun. Thank you so much, Rami, for this interview. And make sure to go and read New Gods coming out this month.
Yeah, it's coming out December 18th, so pick up a copy.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much for this.
Yeah.